Have you ever loved someone so much that you trusted them even when your body was screaming something else? I did, and it took 3 trips to the ER before I finally asked the question no one ever wants to ask. Is my husband poisoning me? You're listening to this story on Renvenge Zinnia, where buried truths are told in the voices of those who lived them. Here, we don't just tell stories. We let the ones who were hurt speak. If you've ever felt dismissed, sidelined, or betrayed by the people you thought you could trust, you're not alone. And somewhere in what you're about to hear, you might just find a piece of yourself. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a true story that makes silence speak. My name is Marissa Langford. I'm 41st Executive Vice President of Medora Care Health System, overseeing national strategic expansion. But that day, I wasn't in a boardroom. I was sitting at the long glass dining table of my sister-in-law's apartment, bathed in sunlight, surrounded by flowers, wine, and napkins, folded with the kind of precision that only comes from premeditation. Sabrina Langford, my husband's younger sister, was the host. She prided herself on her intimate yet elevated brunches, held monthly. She was sitting directly across from me, stirring her untouched coffee with a small silver spoon, eyes fixed on me. That's when Garrett, my husband, placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. "Don't you want to try the one I made just for you, babe?" His voice was warm, soft, familiar. His hand rested gently on my shoulder, a familiar gesture, that familiar half-smile. But the eyes, his eyes were cold, like polished steel. I looked at the cup. Steam curled lazily upward from the deep brown surface, but the smell was wrong. I can't even describe it. Not burned, not spoiled. It had a faint metallic bitterness, something sharp that clenched my gut on instinct. I looked up. Sabrina was still watching me. She smiled, stirring her own coffee. "Garrett's been obsessed with these new blends lately," she said sweetly. Too sweet. "Only for you." I didn't respond. I sat up straighter, eyes on the cup, and I remembered the tea she made for me last month, after which I landed in the hospital with nausea and dizziness. No toxins were detected. The doctor said it might have been food-related. Sabrina had shrugged. I made it exactly like the one I was drinking. Except, she never took a sip of hers. And now, again, a cup she hadn't touched. Again, that gentle nudge. "Try it." I picked it up, eyes still watching them. Garrett smiled, pleased. Sabrina tilted her head slightly, expectant. I brought it to my lips, but didn't drink. Just barely touched it to my tongue, then set it down. Right then, my phone buzzed. A message from my regional assistant in Florida. Urgent meeting. Arcadia rescheduling request. Arcadia. A $30 million contract. Signing scheduled for Monday. I was the lead signatory. I smiled inwardly. Perfect timing. "Sorry, Southern Branch issue," I said, standing. "Sabrina, mind if I use your office real quick?" "Of course," she replied, and for the first time, lifted her cup, but didn't drink. I walked behind her, pretended to stumble slightly into the table leg. My hand reached for the edge. 1 second, just enough. I switched our cups, mine and hers, with a quiet, clean motion. "Clumsy me," I said, straightening up. "As long as nothing spills," Sabrina smiled, her voice velvet over razors. I walked into her office, but didn't close the door. I stood just behind the cracked frame, holding my breath. Sabrina brought the cup to her lips. 1 sip. Garrett was still watching her, then glanced at the cup I left. His brow furrowed slightly. She took another sip. 3 seconds later, I saw it. Her face paled, hands trembled. She set the cup down hard, liquid sloshing over the edge. "Garrett," her voice cracked. "Something's wrong with this." Garrett turned, and in that fleeting moment, I saw his face drain. "Not that cup," he muttered. A whisper, but sharp as needles to my ears. I stepped out from the office, stood tall in the sunlit kitchen, phone in hand. The camera had been recording since I walked in. Garrett rushed to Sabrina, who now clutched her stomach, sweat on her temples, gasping. She wasn't supposed to drink it. It would have just made her tired for a few days, he mumbled. I looked at them both. My voice was calm, but each word sliced like glass. You mean, just enough to keep me from the Arcadia signing on Monday? Garrett froze. Sabrina looked up, ashen-faced, lips trembling. You switched. The cups. I held up my phone. Everything I've suspected these past 6 months is now in focus. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there in that sunlit kitchen, holding my phone like a living piece of evidence. I used to think some people were just naturally graceful. But now I know. Graceful doesn't mean harmless, and some gentle touches were never accidental to begin with. I met Garrett 3 years ago at a wedding in Charlotte. He stood out, not because he was handsome, but because he knew how to make an entire room believe he was the center of it, without raising his voice. The casual hand on someone's shoulder when he laughed, the question asked at just the right moment. That look, deep enough to make you feel like you were the only one in the room. I wasn't the kind of woman who fell easily, but that time, I found myself smiling back more than I expected. Partly because of Garrett, partly because of Sabrina, his younger sister. She was incredibly warm, the first one to invite me to a family gathering, to introduce me to their mother, even to offer help picking my wedding dress. I used to think, maybe I finally found that storybook in-law family. But not all stories are romance. Some are thrillers, and I had no idea. I was playing the victim. The first time Sabrina accidentally spilled red wine on my dress was at our engagement party. She gasped, apologized. But I remember clearly. That glass was at least a foot away from her hand. It didn't just tip over. I changed. Everyone said, "Good thing you brought a backup." Only one person looked at me quietly for a long moment. Esther, Garrett's mother. She didn't say a word, but I saw something crease in her gaze, a wrinkle that had no name. After that, every family event came with a small accident. A dish that gave me stomach cramps, a bowl of soup, mine only, far saltier than the rest, a strange odor in the guest room I was using. Sabrina always laughed. "You're so sensitive. Must be the hospital work. All those sharp senses." And Garrett would rub my shoulder. "Maybe it's the weather. Could be allergies, seasons changing." I started doubting myself. Was I being too picky? Too hard on his family? I tried to let things go, but oddly enough, every time I was on the brink of a big opportunity, a small accident would occur. Once I was preparing for a presentation to the executive board about our East Coast expansion. The night before, Sabrina dropped by with a special dish. "For good luck," she said. The next morning, I couldn't stand for more than 10 minutes. I thought it was a stomach virus, but all my vitals were fine, except one thing, the pain in my abdomen and the dizziness, exactly like the time before. I didn't say anything to Garrett that day. I just looked at him. He placed his hand gently on my back and said, "Don't worry, take a few days off if you need. They'll still let you lead the project." That line chilled me, because I hadn't told anyone, not even him, that I was in that much pain. I hadn't even decided yet if I'd withdraw from the meeting. How did he know? That question echoed in my head for a week, until I found it, a crumpled note shoved inside Garrett's desk drawer, hastily scribbled, B05 Neurosafe, experimental dissolvable form. I took a photo, said nothing, didn't confront, because I knew. If I asked then, I'd never get the whole truth. Instead, I started documenting every episode, every dish, every meeting delayed, every innocent comment Sabrina made. "You should rest more. You've been looking pale. You're working way too much. Let someone else handle it for once. It's not going to kill anyone." I used to think they were worried about me, until I understood some forms of concern are just people unlocking a door, inviting you in, to a trap they've been setting all along. That afternoon, sitting alone in the hospital room, with an IV still taped to my left arm and a bruise blooming on my right wrist from 2 failed blood draws, I began to remember everything I used to brush off. Every second I once told myself, maybe I'm just overthinking it. I used to believe I was just allergic to random things, that it was the weather, that work stress was pushing my limits. But there was a pattern, and my body was the thing they were testing on. It all started with those brunches at Sabrina's. Once a month, never skipped, coffee, pastries, poached eggs, and something off in whatever was set aside just for me. Every single time I was the first to leave, always dizzy, head throbbing, stomach twisting. Garrett would always seem concerned, always had digestive pills ready in his pocket, always said, it was probably something you ate last night. But ever since I found that note, B05, NeuroSafe, dissolvable trial version. In his desk drawer, I couldn't stop asking myself, what else don't I know? I began collecting everything, pill wrappers, coffee stains, every hospital discharge note, even the short visits. I took photos, recorded voice memos, saved everything in a folder on my laptop named Not in My Head. Then came the second week of April. I was invited to dinner at my mother-in-law's. Sabrina happened to be there. She hugged me tight, said I looked thinner, then offered to make me that Tuscan veggie soup you used to love back when you and Garrett were dating. 30 minutes in, I excused myself and barely made it to the car. Couldn't stand up straight, my back drenched in cold sweat. By 3 a.m., I was in the ER again, mild arrhythmia and acute gastric response. The test results? Inconclusive. Just like every other time. But I remembered Sabrina's eyes as she waved goodbye that night, her voice soft. Next time, I'll make something easier on your stomach, okay? And in my mind, I heard the sound of a knife sliding across porcelain. That was the night I did something I never thought I'd do to the man I once trusted with my life. I started watching Garrett. I installed phone backup software on his devices, linked it to my private laptop. I hid a micro camera in his home office. I routed every backup to an anonymous email account, untraceable to me. And then, the messages started surfacing, short, coded. G, dose was too low. She still made it to the pitch. S, next week, shareholders meeting. G, I'll bump it up 1 level, enough to keep her homebound. Reading those lines felt like someone pressing their hand around my heart and squeezing. This wasn't just betrayal, this was precision. They timed it, dated it, calculated my tolerance, tracked every symptom, every absence from the office. They anticipated it. Garrett once told me, not every pain needs a doctor. Sometimes you just need rest and someone who cares. Now I understood. He was right. Except I wasn't in a marriage. I was in a laboratory, and the one who cared the most was the one holding the syringe. So I made a choice. Next time, I'd let them believe I still suspected nothing, and then I'd show them. Pain doesn't mean surrender, and silence doesn't mean ignorance. I sat down at the table, but this time, I didn't take my usual seat at the head. I picked a different spot, farther from the center, slightly out of the sunlight, not to make room for anyone, but because I wanted to observe. That brunch, like always, was hosted at Sabrina's high-rise condo. Crisp white tablecloths, fresh flowers in the center, and a soft jazz playlist drifting from the ceiling speakers. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was a picture-perfect family gathering. But I'd started noticing the shadows folded between the linen pleats. Garrett walked in after me. His eyes scanned the room, then paused when he saw where I sat, by the window. "You're not sitting at the head today?" he asked. His voice was hard to read, half teasing, half suspicious. I smiled. Figured I'd shake things up a bit. Sabrina looked too. She placed a tray of pastries on the table and walked over. "That seat gets a lot of morning sun. You sure you're okay with that?" I nodded. Morning sun's good for the skin. She pressed her lips into a tight line and turned away. I caught the flicker of irritation in her movement. That day, they'd invited 2 extra guests, a former Oakspire partner and a department head from Medora Care I barely knew, not just a brunch. This was intentional. I realized it when the partner leaned toward me and asked, "So I heard you've got a big meeting with Arcadia coming up. Feeling ready?" My eyebrow arched slightly. "That information was only shared internally last week," he chuckled, a bit stiff. "Oh, Sabrina mentioned it. Said you're the top candidate for the strategic lead role if the deal goes through." Sabrina was pouring orange juice, eyes down, but she chimed in like it was nothing. "I only shared it with a couple close friends. We're all just concerned for you, Marissa. That kind of pressure, it's a lot." "So thoughtful," I said, my voice light as air, "especially when people worry before you even feel the pressure yourself." That line landed like a pebble dropped in still water, quiet, but unmistakable. Garrett glanced at me, didn't say a word, but I saw his hand tighten around the spoon in his cup. I was starting to see it clearly now. This wasn't a meal. This was a test. They weren't feeding me. They were measuring me, checking how sharp I still was, whether I could still read the room, whether I still had control. A stress test, dressed in croissants and silk napkins. And sitting at that table, I didn't feel like a wife or a guest. I felt like I was in a boardroom. No files, no laptops, just questions designed to corner you without ever sounding confrontational. I sat still, watching. The way Garrett touched Sabrina's wrist when she poured the tea, the way she scooted her chair too close to him, the way they told old college stories, always mentioning that one time I missed due to a mysterious allergy. I memorized everything. A man at the end of the table said, "Between work and health, I always choose health." Sabrina smiled sweetly and turned to me. "What do you think? If a doctor told you to rest for 3 days before the Arcadia meeting, would you actually do it?" I lifted my teacup. Didn't drink, just felt the warmth on my fingers. "Maybe you should ask the doctor, but before that, maybe ask, who exactly plans on giving me the pills?" Sabrina blinked. Garrett paused mid-bite. I set the cup down, gently. "That's a strange joke, Marissa," Sabrina said with a nervous little laugh. "This brunch is meant to be relaxing." I smiled again. Relaxing is when you don't have to analyze every look, every question, and every glass someone sets in front of you. Silence. No one said anything for a few seconds, and I just sat there, calm, unmoved, because by now I understood I hadn't picked the wrong seat. No matter where I sat, I was still the one they were trying to take down. That morning, Garrett walked into the kitchen with a bright smile and a white porcelain cup with a silver rim in his hand. He set it down next to me, right where I was reviewing my final notes for the Arcadia presentation. "For this special day," he said, and kissed the top of my head. I glanced at the coffee. Steam curled up softly, carrying the scent I used to love. Medium roast Arabica, with a hint of cinnamon and vanilla. But this time, something was off, just slightly, like a faint bitterness beneath the sweetness. I inhaled again. I didn't know if it was my suspicion talking, or just the memory of all those unexplained illnesses. I looked up. "Did you make this?" "Mm-hmm. With the new press. Added a bit of cinnamon, just how you like it," Garrett replied gently. I smiled, half-heartedly, then whispered, "How thoughtful of you." Those words used to be sincere. Now they were a mask. I wrapped my hand around the cup, feeling its heat, but instead of sipping, I casually slid it toward the edge of my laptop, just enough to look natural. Garrett didn't notice. He said a few more things and left the kitchen, leaving me with the lingering aroma, and a question growing louder by the second. This time, what's in it? I opened a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of cold brew I'd made the night before, poured some over ice, and placed it in my bedroom. I came back, looked at Garrett's coffee, still untouched, and I had no plans to change that. That's when Sabrina texted, "Brunch today? I made peach oat muffins. Got something exciting to share." I stared at the message, then at the cup, and in that moment, everything connected. A map in my head lit up with a clear route through poison. I used to be the one they cared for. Now, if I didn't find the truth, there might not be a next time. I arrived at Sabrina's place with the calmest smile I could wear. She was in a flowy white linen dress, hair curled like she'd just stepped out of a magazine, the picture of a harmless sister-in-law. "Come in, I just brewed a fresh batch. Garrett said you've been into the Ethiopia medium roast again," she chirped. I stepped into the living room. Another porcelain cup waited on the coffee table, steaming, same silver rim. I nodded and touched it. Still hot, fresh. "Hang on, I'll grab the muffins," she called as she disappeared into the kitchen. I had 3 seconds. I switched the cups. I poured a bit of my cold brew into Sabrina's porcelain cup, then emptied most of Garrett's cup, the one he gave me this morning, into the one Sabrina had prepared. 2 cups, one silent swap. No one would notice. She came back smiling, a tray of muffins in hand. "Try it. I roasted lighter this time. Thought you might like a change." I lifted the cup, the one I knew was mine. Took a sip. She lifted hers, started sipping the one meant for me. Everything was normal for about 3 minutes. We chatted about Arcadia, the new strategic board, the negotiations. Then Sabrina asked, "So, who do you think they'll pick for Eastern Division lead?" I shook my head. "Still waiting on formal notice, but you know how delicate these contracts are." That's when she reached for her neck. She rubbed just below her ear, then her collarbone. Her brows furrowed slightly. "Is it warm in here?" she asked. I quietly unlocked my phone, turned on the camera, propped it against the muffin tray, just enough to capture the whole frame. "Might be the scented candle," I replied, not looking away from her cup. 5 minutes in, her hands were visibly shaking. Her index finger scratched along the edge of the table, eyes darting, unfocused. I kept my voice steady. "Do you want to sit down for a minute? Or should I call someone for you?" Sabrina shook her head, tried to sit straighter, but bumped her cup, spilling some of the contents. The liquid seeped into the white tablecloth. She reached for a napkin, then froze. Her eyes locked onto the bottom of the cup, a faint yellow-tinged residue, odorless, but visible. "What is that?" she whispered. Right then, Garrett walked into the room. He saw the cup, saw Sabrina's trembling hands, saw me sitting still, phone screen glowing bright, recording everything. 1 second. That's all it took to see his face go pale. He stammered, "No, that's not the right cup." You switched them." Sabrina turned to him, panicked. "You said it'd just make her tired for a few days." I stood, voice calm as glass. "So it's both of you." Garrett stepped back. Sabrina slumped. I reached into my bag, pulled out my backup phone, and pressed a button. 911, I have a woman showing signs of possible anaphylactic shock, unknown substance in beverage. As I ended the call, Sabrina reached for Garrett's arm. "I can't, Marissa." She switched the cups. I didn't look at her. I looked straight at Garrett and said only one thing. "This Monday, I'll still be leading the Arcadia presentation. But maybe the two of you shoo." When the ambulance arrived, Sabrina could barely keep her balance. Garrett caught her. His face pale, hands trembling, as if he were the one who drank whatever had been in that cup. I didn't look away, not out of sympathy, but because I wanted to remember everything, every glance, every grip, every word they were about to say. I stepped forward, voice steady. "I'll be riding with her to the hospital." The paramedic hesitated. I added calmly, "I'm family. And I want to make sure my sister-in-law receives the right treatment." Garrett looked like he wanted to object, but then he didn't. I got in beside Sabrina, who had now started twitching slightly in her right hand. In my coat pocket, my phone screen was already loaded. The same email I'd sent earlier, complete with the audio and video files pulled from the living room camera. Subject line, Part 1, Coffee. I tapped forward, sending it to my personal attorney, Denise Galloway, a seasoned criminal defense lawyer who once told me, "If you give me the data, I'll turn it into justice." At Memorial Hospital in Nashville, Sabrina was rushed into emergency care. I waited in the corridor, my phone still in hand, unwavering. A nurse came out with a serious look. "We're seeing significant abnormalities in her blood work." I nodded. I believe the attending doctor should hear something first before any assessments are made. I handed her my phone. The woman who took it looked about 50, small frame, but her eyes had the kind of clarity that cuts straight through lies. Her badge read, Dr. Eleanor Phillips, Chief of Toxicology. It didn't take 30 seconds. She listened to the clip of Sabrina's panicked voice. "Marissa." She switched cups. "Garrett, you said it would just make her tired for a few days." Dr. Phillips's face hardened. She whispered, "This doesn't just accidentally end up in coffee." At that moment, Garrett approached. His shirt was wrinkled, hair messy, and his eyes couldn't seem to land on me or anyone else. "Marissa, please, let me explain." Dr. Phillips stepped in without pause. "Sir, you are not to approach. Please remain in the hallway." I didn't look at him. Instead, I pulled out my secondary phone, the one I'd used to record every hospital visit. I brought up a gallery of screenshots. Text messages I'd backed up from his phone when he'd forgotten to change the passcode. I turned to the doctor. I was hospitalized in February, April, and June, each time after breakfast, prepared thoughtfully by my husband and sister-in-law. I'm requesting a reanalysis of all previous test results. There may be a disturbing pattern. 2 hours later, Dr. Phillips returned with a report. "We compared your blood panels from all 3 prior hospitalizations with Sabrina Langford's latest sample. Result, the same sequence of compounds, a class of chemicals only permitted in clinical research trials. And most importantly, Sabrina's dosage today was nearly 3 times higher than anything found in you." I nodded. The question was no longer, was it real? It was, how long has it been real? That evening, Denise came to the hospital in person. She brought an emergency subpoena. Authorized by an independent forensic board, Garrett was asked to surrender his phone. Hospital security placed him in a private waiting room, not for Sabrina's protection, for mine. I also submitted a full evidence package to the police, a personal log, date, time, symptoms, meals, who prepared them full audio files from my secondary device, photos of the pills, rashes, hospital discharge summaries, and most critically, a screenshot of Garrett's text to Sabrina sent just 3 days ago. "She can't show up to Arcadia. You just need to take care of the rest." The next morning, I received a single message from Denise. "We have enough for a search warrant at Oakspire. Garrett and Sabrina are now officially under investigation for systematic poisoning." I walked into the hospital room around 5 p.m. The sky outside was still bright, but inside the air was thick, with disinfectant, with the damp scent of IV tubes, and with the slow rot of what people once called family. Sabrina was lying on her side. Her face was hollow, her hair stuck in damp clumps, and the eyes that used to dart and scan every room were now fixed blankly on the beige wall in front of her. Outside the door, a female officer stood post, standard protocol for witness protection, or more accurately, flight prevention. I stepped in, said nothing, didn't pull out my phone. I just stood there, 2 paces away from the bed. It took her a few seconds to realize. "Marissa, is that you?" Her voice was faint, but not too faint to hide one thing clearly: fear. I didn't answer. My eyes landed on the bedsheet, still stained with the dark coffee spill from the morning she collapsed. She spoke again. I didn't think it would go this far." I nodded slowly. "Go far like me being hospitalized 3 times, or far like you drinking what you meant for me that morning. Her lips tightened. Her right hand was still twitching. Garrett. Garrett said it was temporary, just to keep you resting so Arcadia wouldn't land in your hands. I looked up, met her eyes directly. So, over a contract, a strategic position, you traded away family honor and my life for your name on a proposal? She turned her face. One eye had already welled up. I really used to look up to you. I did. You were the only person in Garrett's family I could talk to. I used to think, if I ever had a sister-in-law like you, I'd be lucky. I let out a soft laugh, but it wasn't kind. You used to think, then you rethought, and chose to poison me. She reached forward slightly, like she wanted to touch me. I stepped back. Marissa. Her voice cracked. What do you think I deserve? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared into the same pair of eyes that used to play perfect sister-in-law at every family gathering. I think you deserve to hear the truth, the kind you can't argue with for once. I pulled out a printed transcript, an official copy from the original recording, stamped and sealed by police. It read, "The Arcadia deal's worth $30 million. I'm not letting that girl destroy everything I've built for 6 years. This batch is stronger. She won't be leaving bed by Monday." Sabrina burst into tears halfway through the second line, but her tears didn't move me. I spoke, slowly. What killed me wasn't the poison. It was the trust I gave someone who called herself my sister. I turned and walked out, didn't look back. Out in the hallway, the officer asked quietly, "Would you like to submit anything else?" I nodded. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a photo. It was from our engagement party 3 years ago. Sabrina had her arm around my shoulders, beaming. On the back, I wrote, "I used to be the one you trusted most, and you were the one I never wanted to accuse. But justice doesn't care for sentimental scripts." That night, back home, I opened the storage closet and reached for an old box. Inside were all the keepsakes from my time with Garrett's family, a handwritten card from Sabrina inviting me to their home for the first time, a pair of earrings she gave me for my birthday last year, and a letter she once wrote, "I know you'll be the one who keeps this family together." I tore each piece, slowly, not out of hatred, but because I needed to separate my emotions from the evidence they left behind. I walked into the hospital room around 5 p.m. The sky outside was still bright, but inside the air was thick, with disinfectant, with the damp scent of IV tubes, and with the slow rot of what people once called family. Sabrina was lying on her side. Her face was hollow, her hair stuck in damp clumps, and the eyes that used to dart and scan every room were now fixed blankly on the beige wall in front of her. Outside the door, a female officer stood post, standard protocol for witness protection, or more accurately, flight prevention. I stepped in, said nothing, didn't pull out my phone. I just stood there, 2 paces away from the bed. It took her a few seconds to realize. "Marissa, is that you?" Her voice was faint, but not too faint to hide one thing clearly: fear. I didn't answer. My eyes landed on the bed sheet, still stained with the dark coffee spill from the morning she collapsed. She spoke again. I didn't think it would go this far." I nodded slowly. "Go far like me being hospitalized 3 times, or far like you drinking what you meant for me that morning?" Her lips tightened. Her right hand was still twitching. "Garrett. Garrett said it was temporary, just to keep you resting so Arcadia wouldn't land in your hands." I looked up, met her eyes directly. "So, over a contract, a strategic position, you traded away family honor and my life for your name on a proposal?" She turned her face. One eye had already welled up. I really used to look up to you. I did. You were the only person in Garrett's family I could talk to. I used to think, if I ever had a sister-in-law like you, I'd be lucky. I let out a soft laugh, but it wasn't kind. You used to think, then you rethought, and chose to poison me." She reached forward slightly, like she wanted to touch me. I stepped back. "Marissa," her voice cracked, "what do you think I deserve?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared into the same pair of eyes that used to play perfect sister-in-law at every family gathering. "I think you deserve to hear the truth, the kind you can't argue with for once." I pulled out a printed transcript, an official copy from the original recording, stamped and sealed by police. It read, "The Arcadia deal's worth $30 million. I'm not letting that girl destroy everything I've built for 6 years. This batch is stronger. She won't be leaving bed by Monday." Sabrina burst into tears halfway through the second line, but her tears didn't move me. I spoke, slowly. What killed me wasn't the poison. It was the trust I gave someone who called herself my sister. I turned and walked out, didn't look back. Out in the hallway, the officer asked quietly, "Would you like to submit anything else?" I nodded. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a photo. It was from our engagement party 3 years ago. Sabrina had her arm around my shoulders, beaming. On the back, I wrote, "I used to be the one you trusted most, and you were the one I never wanted to accuse. But justice doesn't care for sentimental scripts." That night, back home, I opened the storage closet and reached for an old box. Inside were all the keepsakes from my time with Garrett's family, a handwritten card from Sabrina inviting me to their home for the first time, a pair of earrings she gave me for my birthday last year, and a letter she once wrote, "I know you'll be the one who keeps this family together." I tore each piece, slowly, not out of hatred, but because I needed to separate my emotions from the evidence they left behind. I think when someone stabs you straight in the heart, you'll know instantly what pain is. But the deepest wounds, they don't always bleed. Sometimes they come from words, from glances, from gestures so small they slice you in tiny, invisible cuts. No blood, but they never heal. After the trial, I returned to my old office at Medora Care. Before everything happened, I'd been leading a project, a new hospital branch out west. It was something I'd spent over a year building, but because of my health, the suspicions, the slow poison running through my body, I had to step down, right at the peak of it all. Now I had the chance to go back, to take it all back, but I didn't want to. I didn't need to. 1 week after Arcadia offered the 3-year contract, I sent them a simple letter. I accept the role of strategic lead on one condition: full authority to select a new team, no one with prior ties to Oakspire. They agreed. I handpicked 3 new members, including a young physician who'd been dropped from the project 2 years ago by Sabrina for being too outspoken. I wasn't out for revenge. I simply opened doors for those who deserved to walk through and closed the ones I once had to crawl through just to survive. That afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from the holding facility, Garrett's handwriting, shaky, uneven. Just 2 lines. "I'm sorry, I didn't know it would go this far. I just wanted you to rest." I tore the letter up, not out of anger, but because I finally understood. People only apologize when the damage is already done, when the consequences are no longer in their hands. But the pain didn't start with the coffee. It started with trust, and I didn't have any more left to lend. That night, I walked past the ICU, the place where I would have been if I hadn't switched that cup. I paused at the glass door. The overhead lights cast a reflection. Me, standing tall, awake, alive. A young nurse walked by, glanced at me, and smiled. "Are you doing okay, ma'am?" I nodded. "I'm okay," because I chose not to keep hurting. A week after the trial, I received an email from a woman named Catherine Royce. The subject line simply read, "I don't know you, but thank you for that cup of coffee." She was the director of a nonprofit that supports victims of covert poisoning and psychological abuse in professional environments. something I once thought only happened in movies. In her email, she shared that it was my speech at the Nashville conference that gave her the courage to finally walk away from her law firm, a place where her superior had accidentally caused her to be hospitalized 3 times in 6 months, always right before review season. Catherine invited me to speak in one of their webinars. I said yes. It aired on a quiet Friday night, just a few hundred live viewers. By Monday morning, it had crossed 2.3 million views. Then the emails started coming in. Their subject lines read like whispers that had never been allowed to be spoken out loud. My husband always gives me vitamins from an unmarked bottle. They said I had anxiety, but I lost my voice every time we had strategy meetings. I just want to know, is it wrong to suspect the people I love? No, I thought. It's not wrong to listen to your survival instinct. What's wrong is the system that taught you that your suspicion makes you ungrateful, overdramatic, weak. A few weeks later, I launched a new initiative. I called it the Coffee Line. It's not a charity. It's not a protest movement. It's a place for people who've been turned into silent targets to finally tell their stories in their own voices. We hosted closed-door sessions for women in medicine, finance, education, and executive leadership, industries where pain doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves a trail of unexplained absences. I opened the first session with just one question. Who here has ever felt like they were just imagining things? Every hand went up, every single one, and I realized I didn't need to shout. I just needed to stop backing down. A journalist asked me during my first national interview, "You used to be a CEO, now you're a speaker. What would you say your job is today?" I smiled. Not a CEO, not a victim, not an activist, I said. I'm just a survivor who chose to make that a position of power. A month later, a hospital in Chicago invited me to train their staff on how to detect signs of subtle manipulation in the workplace. That morning, as I walked into the conference room, a woman stood up and started clapping. I recognized her, the nurse who had cared for Sabrina the night she was brought into the ER. She walked over to me, leaned in, and whispered, "You didn't cry that night. But I could feel the cold around you, and it wasn't from the air conditioning. Thank you for standing up. You didn't just save yourself." After everything, I never changed my name. I'm still Marissa Langford. But now, when someone says that name, they don't think of a victim in a poisoning case. They think of a woman who chose to live and chose to speak. That morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Inside the conference room on the 15th floor, there was a long wooden table, pale leather chairs, and sunlight streaming through the large glass window, a kind of light I once believed would never find its way back to me. I placed a white ceramic mug on the table. No coffee, just water, no steam, just clarity. The kind I wanted to start every day with, from now on. My new assistant, her name is Eliza, walked in carrying a stack of folders. She glanced at the mug and smiled softly. "No morning coffee anymore?" I answered without turning from the window. "It's not that I don't drink it. I just want to be the one who makes it." That mug reminded me of a version of myself that once existed, always polite, always accepting what was handed to her, too hesitant to question strange tastes or off smells. A version of Marissa Langford who once believed that silence meant keeping the peace, that if she was kind enough, people would simply do the right thing. But after everything, I've learned this. Silence is never the mark of kindness. It's the thing manipulators rely on the most. I once believed in an unspoken arrangement, that men protect and women understand, but it was the man I trusted most who chose chemicals over the truth. I looked up at the glass wall again and saw my reflection. No longer the polished CEO featured on magazine covers, just a woman who chose to stand after a fall that had been so carefully orchestrated. And when you stand, not out of revenge, but to live rightly, then every step you take is a form of victory. Later that day, I wrapped up my first presentation to the new executive team with just one slide. It read, "Trust is not silent, and coffee should never smell like fear." That afternoon, as I walked out of the building, the old doorman, Malcolm, greeted me like he always did. "Need me to call you a car this evening, CEO Langford?" I paused, looked at him, and nodded gently. "Thank you. But just use my name. Today I just want to be Marissa." As the car pulled away from downtown Nashville, I looked back through the rear window, not to make sure I wasn't being followed, but to make sure I'd left no part of myself in that past. No more sterile boardrooms, no more strange-smelling coffee, no more husband who used the word concern as a way to slip something into my cup. That night, I made myself a cup of peppermint tea, sat by the window. The breeze was gentle, and the quiet wasn't out of fear. It was because I no longer needed any more words. I opened my laptop and typed the first line of the book I'm working on. I used to think survival was just a lucky scratch. Now I know it's a skill, and I learned it from a cup of coffee. I used to think that the older I got, the more peace I'd have. But then I learned, pain doesn't check your age. It comes from the ones you once trusted, and it often wears a very familiar face: family. Marissa's story isn't just about poison. It's a wake-up call for anyone who's ever ignored their gut just to avoid being called paranoid. I don't know who you are or where you're reading this from, but if you've ever stayed silent to keep the peace, ever pretended you were fine just so no one would say you're too emotional, you're not alone. You don't have to scream. You just have to stand, the way Marissa did. You don't have to become someone else. Just return to yourself, the version that no longer asks permission to exist. And if anyone ever called you weak for trusting the wrong person, remember this: the one who stabbed you was cruel, but the one who survived to tell the story is the strongest of all.